One of the things I have discovered over my 33 years of ordained ministry is that when someone finds out that I am a Presbyterian minister, I am too often called upon to defend John Calvin. Now, if you're new to the Presbyterian tradition, John Calvin was a French-born Roman Catholic, classically trained lawyer who fell under the influence of the Reformation that was sweeping across Europe. In 1536, he published his magnum opus, The Institutes of the Christian Religion, and was off and running as the mind, if not the father, of the Reformed branch of the Protestant Reformation. When most people hear the name John Calvin, what do you suppose comes to mind? Predestination. Everyone thinks they know what Calvin had to say about predestination, which is funny because ultimately Calvin wasn't all that certain what he had to say about predestination. Calvin believed that God chose who would be saved. But then that seemed to imply that God chose those who wouldn't be saved. That became the argument known as double predestination. But it doesn't make much sense. What Calvin did get right is that we aren't in charge of deciding. God invites us into relationship with God. God makes the first move. God makes the first choice. God opens the door. How we answer, whether we answer, and whether we choose to walk through that open door is up to us. Our life of faith is our response to God's invitation. That's where Calvin got it right. Still, in all honesty, as important as that idea is, there is another of Calvin's ideas that is even more important, and it's that idea that this sermon is all about. Our story from the Acts of the Apostles tells us of a time when Paul and Barnabas were in Lystra and healed a man who had been lame since birth. When the man stood up and began to walk around, the people of Lystra cried out, "The gods have come down to us in human form." The priest of the Greek temple brought oxen and garlands of flowers to sacrifice to and to worship Paul and Barnabas. Paul and Barnabas respond by tearing their clothes, a sign of mourning in ancient and modern Judaism, and strongly told the people, "We are mortals just like you, and we bring you good news, that you should turn from these worthless things to the living God, who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them." The people of Lystra, not unlike the people of here and now, experienced something wondrous and responded by attempting to make gods out of something far less than God. It was a reminder of what we are commanded in the second commandment: "You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them." Following the miraculous healing of the lame man, the people were heralding Paul and Barnabas as gods, ready to offer sacrifice and worship. The people were ready to elevate the apostles to divine status. In case you haven't noticed, that is a tradition that continues to this day. Whenever we see someone, another human being, not all that different from us, achieve something that we think amazing, even miraculous, we begin our idol worship. It may be a political figure from any party. It may be a business giant. It may be a sports legend. It may be someone who simply carries the title celebrity. It really doesn't matter. We exalt them to dizzying heights, and we are prepared to bring garlands and kill the fatted calf. This isn't just admiration. This goes way beyond admiration. It grows until we find ourselves defending that which is indefensible, overlooking heinous improprieties, condoning immoral practice, and justifying whatever these demigods do, simply because that's just the way it is. The late Professor John Leith reminded us the Reformed polemic against idolatry prevents human endeavors from overreaching themselves, claiming too much for themselves, and thus destroying themselves. Only God is great enough to answer to our highest and total loyalty without destroying the truly human. Every lesser loyalty, when made absolute, is abortive and destructive. The exaltation of another human being to godlike status is not only an abrogation of the second commandment against idolatry, it is a direct contravention of the first commandment. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the house of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. This is where Calvin got it right. Idolatry, especially when it comes to idolizing another human being, is deadly to the soul. It robs God of the place that only God should have in our lives, and too often leads us away from the way of God and onto paths that lead to destruction. What Calvin also got right, and one of the brilliant insights he continues to offer, is how very easily we can take anything and make it an idol. He reminds us that we all too quickly give the position and standing which should be God's alone to all manner of things that are less than God. Calvin instructs us that we will look to things that are less than God for meaning and significance in our lives. We will trade the role of the connection to God for relationships with lesser things that we hope will bring us happiness and contentment. These are not necessarily negative things. The tricky thing about idolatry is that you can make an idol out of something quite good and noble. Some of our most widely accepted idols are exceptionally good and well-intentioned. What was the subject most addressed by Jesus? Prayer? Reading Scripture? Keeping the Sabbath? Nope. The thing Jesus most talked about was money and possessions. Hands down, no fear of contradiction. Why? Because Jesus knew, in an economy far simpler than our own, just how easy it is to misuse money and mistake money and possessions for the principal goal in life. Jesus knew that money and possessions can easily become sources of social injustice and used in ways that are destructive to the common good. Jesus understood that money and possessions are seductions that can lead to idolatry. Jesus realized that to look to money and possessions for the joy and comfort of life was to settle for a pale and puny imitation of the joy and comfort that comes from a life spent in loving and serving God and neighbor. When money and possessions take the place of God for providing meaning and significance in life, we are flirting with idolatry. While I'm meddling, let's think about food for a minute. Now, I've got some expertise in this area, as you can plainly see. Food is a good thing. We need it to survive. But sometimes food moves beyond necessity and becomes obsession. We look to food for meaning and for significance in our lives. We spend time thinking about food, planning where we will go to eat, musing on what we will prepare, making multiple trips to multiple stores to procure the provisions. We spend money, lots of money, on food, and even more on food that we throw away. Food quickly becomes a controlling force in our lives, and we spend more time and money on food than we do on serving God and neighbor. And before you know it, food becomes an idol, a little demigod that we worship and serve. Want one more? Probably not, but here it comes. Let's think about technology for a moment. There's absolutely nothing wrong with technology. It's astounding what we have available to us today that saves us time, opens doors to information, and enables us to make connections across the world and across social platforms. We have more computing capacity in a calculator, a simple calculator, than NASA had when they landed Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the surface of the moon July 20th, 1969, 50 years ago. Oh my. But with the proliferation of technology and its devices, we see more people attached to screens than reality. We placate little children by giving them something with a screen. We arm our teenagers with smartphones, which does not necessarily produce smarter teens. We see adults glued to their screens. Now, this is my pet peeve for the morning. The worst offense to me is when adults use their phones like walkie-talkies with the audio on speaker, allowing us to fully participate in every glorious detail of their last doctor's appointment. I feel better for having said it. Now take any of those technological tools away from any of those people, children through adults, and watch what happens. They will have something equivalent to the DTs. I had all of the kids, the first time we went on a cross-country trip to Colorado, give me their cell phones. They didn't know what to do. They were frozen. It took 2 days for them to become normal people again. That's why I love taking them to Scotland. There's absolutely no cell connection on an island in the middle of the ocean. Technology, while perfectly good, becomes a source for meaning and significance in our lives. How many likes did my Facebook post get today? It becomes a replacement for time spent in serving God and neighbor. This is where Calvin got it right. We can take just about anything and turn it into an idol, into the governing force of our lives. We can take just about anything and imbue it with power and place in our lives that is rightfully God's alone. We can take things that are good and necessary and allow them to guide and direct our lives instead of living in sync with God. Now, the good news is that we can recognize when this is happening, and we can change our behavior and practice. The good news is that God forgives and provides us with the strength and ability to reorganize and restructure our lives and practices to get back into the right priorities of life. The good news is that we can enjoy the life God meant us to have. when it comes to the whole predestination thing, I think Calvin sort of blew it. What he got right was that God reaches out to us and invites us into the life that God intended us to have. When it comes to this whole business of idolatry, of our ability to allow other things other than God to become the source for meaning and significance in our life, he nailed that one right on the head. Keep your eyes open this week to where those traps may be for you. Keep a lookout for those things that you are serving that are not God. Watch for those things that are controlling your life. Maybe just a little too much. And then reprioritize life to be what God had in mind in the first place. Put God back at the top, and everything else will find its place for now and evermore.